I think most people who think seriously about science, post-Enlightenment, people like in our generation who are doing science, who are not Christians, they think there's no way to reconcile science with either theism broadly or with Christianity specifically. And that, I think a lot of young people actually struggle with this relationship. Is Christianity anti-science in a world that tells me that science is the ruler of all, that science is the best way to know information? If that's the case, if I can't reconcile science to Christianity, why would I ever abandon science when a culture around me says it's the most primary way to know anything? I don't think that classically Christianity is opposed to science for a few reasons. Number one, I think historically, we're not opposed to the idea of doing science. We might say that we are opposed to scientism in the sense that scientism making the claim that the only way you can know anything is to be engaged in a scientific process. I'm only inclined, quote unquote, to trust something if I can determine its value or determine its true by way of science. That view, which the culture may embrace, is a view that we would say as theists is not true. There's lots of things you can know without doing science. There's lots of things that science seems to be powerless to explain. You can't understand logical facts and logical claims or claims about mathematics by doing science. Those things precede science. You have to understand math claims and logic claims before you can even begin to do science. Science can't tell you, for example, what you ought to do. It can tell you what is, but it's really voiceless when it comes to moral or ethical claims. Science can't even tell you large metaphysical claims about whether or not the external world is even real. Science can't even tell you about beauty. What is the nature of it? Aesthetic truths cannot be gleaned from science. There are lots of things that we examine and value that we can't even learn from science. If science is the only way to know something, well, that is a view that we would say is not true. We reject that, scientism. But the idea that we couldn't use science is something we would not reject. As a matter of fact, the history of Christianity demonstrates that many intelligent, great, classic, historic, scientific thinkers were in fact believers. And a lot of that's because they understood the value of the classic questions. Kepler, Newton, these folks, even currently, Michael Behe, James Tour. You can think of a lot of Christian science experts in one field or another, from biochemistry to astrophysics. These folks are believers, and they're still doing science, but here's what they've done. They've said, the classic questions that you can ask when doing any investigation, the what, the why, the when, the how, those questions are not enough to get you to all the answers. You have to include those questions, but you also have to be willing to ask a who question. If you think about it, my investigations of murders, I could ask the what, the when, how, where, why, all those questions. Those 5 questions will get me to some truth, but until I'm willing to ask a who question, no one goes to jail. Who questions are important. And in science, for the most part, since the Enlightenment, we've decided that there are no who questions you can ask. Believe it or not, scientists used to ask the who questions, especially when all the science says there's a who that is the best explanation. For example, information in DNA. The best explanation for information in DNA is a who, not a what, because you can't get information from whats. You can only get information from whos. But if all the science tells me I've got information, true information in the genome, why am I not allowed, on the basis of principle alone, not to ask a who question? It seems to me I ought to be allowed to ask that question, and scientists did that really until modern times. Why could we not do science and ask a who question? Last thing I would say, science can actually assist us to determine if a theistic claim is true. Science is telling us right now, at least, astrophysics are telling us that it appears that the most standard, the standard cosmological model is arguing that we are in a universe that is finite, that has a beginning, in which all space, time, and matter came into existence from nothing. If that's the case, we need a cause that is non-spatial, non-temporal, non-material, and incredibly strong in order to cause all space, time, and matter to come into existence from nothing. We also know we've got information in the genome that points to mind. Do you see how we can start to begin to construct a suspect profile explaining the data we find in science? And if it turns out the data we construct is best explained by the existence of a personal creator being that is a mind that's powerful enough, non-spatial, non-temporal, non-material, to create everything from nothing and can account for the information we see in the genome, why would we not use science to support the claims that we see being made theologically in Scripture? So in fact, I think not only are we not anti-science. We can actually employ science to determine if the claims of Scripture are true.